This was a very entertaining and enjoyable episode of Black Clover. Now, I know many are like, whoa, Chibi, what? Like, I know many are backing up saying, like, what? Like, what, you liked an episode? Yeah, I liked this episode. I ain't gonna lie. I mean, it obviously wasn't perfect, but I liked this episode. I will hands down say I enjoyed what I watched this week. I actually enjoyed this episode. I wasn't looking at the clock. I wasn't looking how far the episode was in, like, to it. For instance, when, usually if an episode is dragging, I typically look at, like, the timer, see what time of the video we're at, how much I have left, and I wasn't doing that for this episode. I actually was quite entertained. Now, take that however you want. You can think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I actually did enjoy this episode. So anyways, getting right into it, this episode focuses on the introduction of the Black Bulls. Now, for the most part, that's what the entirety of the episode is about. It's really just that. Introducing, like, new characters, and the characters that we're going to probably be with for the rest of the series, until, like, the end game of the story. These are the characters that are the supporting cast. And so, we got to meet all of them, we got to see their little quirks and personalities, and what, really makes them stand out. Overall, there's nothing really different that I've seen from other shows, or manga, or whatever. I mean, you have the one that's like a glutton, you have the one that is just too attached to his sister, you have the delinquent, you have the gloomy one, you have the one that always wants to fight, you have the one that's like a boss, you have the drunk girl. I mean, all these different characters we see throughout the Black Bulls in this episode, they're very stereotypical. There's nothing necessarily original about them. Now, that does not automatically mean that it's bad. As I said many times, not just in Black Clover, but other series I've talked about, just because it's cliche, just because it's stereotypical, doesn't automatically mean it's trash. That's not what it means. Now, it just depends on the execution. And so far, even though the characters are very stereotypical, there's nothing exceptional or anything that stands out, I do like the characters. I do. They seem to be, quirky enough, and they have this, chemistry with each other that I truly do enjoy. It actually reminds me of the old days of Fairy Tail when I actually did enjoy the, show and manga. Yes, I know when everybody thinks of Fairy Tail, they automatically think of the bad, but there was a time when Fairy Tail did start, it was enjoyable. And you can't deny that. You can't. When it first started, it was enjoyable. Nowadays, it just has a stigma. When you mention the name, it's bad. But I'm reminded of the earlier days, or at the very least when I first started Fairy Tail, when I look at the Black Bulls. And I find that fairly entertaining, overall. But anyways, though, let's talk about what this episode did that made me enjoy it. And that was most likely the second half of the episode with the initiation. We have an initiation test to where Asta, he needs to get his Black Bull robe. He wants the coat and all that for he can have it, for he can be an official member. And so you have it to where one of the delinquents is like, hey, if you're going to join us, you're going to have to do like this initiation test to be able to join. And so Asta is forced to do these crazy, wacky things. For instance, like 5,000 push-ups, sit-ups, and then he's doing like the Saitama training method, actually. But he's doing like 5,000 sit-ups, push-ups. This man had to like hit his head up against a boulder, which is obviously causing brain damage. It's not going to help the man in terms of his yelling, that's going to probably make it a lot louder. But on top of that, though, the man had to also fight the delinquent, which was to be expected, because at the end of the day, this is a shonen, and since it's a shonen that is very cliche, it was just to be expected that some form of initiation, there had to be some form of fighting going on, and that's what happened. We had to where Asta had to go up against this dude. Now, we know everything about Asta thus far, so far from his character. We know that he's very new with using his grimoire. He doesn't have magic, and so he doesn't seem like he has a lot of capabilities to be able to stand up against these, high-level opponents. In this case, when you see the Black Bull in this episode asked to challenge Asta, I honestly figured that Asta was going to get whooped, and then, he was going to get saved at the last second. And something very similar did happen to that, but it was a little bit different to where Asta saved himself. So we now know that Asta has another unique ability when it comes to his sword. His sword doesn't just slice through any type of magic, it actually can apparently block any type of magic. So that's, pretty broken in a way. So he has like a shield and he has an attack, like a nice sword and a shield all in one. So I do like the design of that. And I gotta admit, I really do like Asta's design when he holds his big sword. I mean, it's just something about great swords being held that I just truly love. Be it in a game, be it in an anime, manga, or even a regular, TV series. I really love it when characters hold, like, big swords. It's just something I've always been a big fan of. Now, that's clearly just being subjective and biased. I just love stuff like that. And seeing Asta holding that big sword when he pulls it out and all that, and he puts it up, I'm like, that's pretty cool. So, anyways, moving off of that, Asta has to fight the dude, and we find out that Asta, he is able to block anything, and everybody's rather impressed or shocked because this makes him very weird and different and interesting because he doesn't have, like, capabilities to shoot magic from a distance or whatever. At the very least right now, he can only go in up close and fight with his sword. So he's always in a bad situation, most likely, when he's fighting someone with magic, because normally when you think of magic users, they always either enhance their body in a way to where they can fight up close, or they are able to buff people or shoot from a distance with magic, arcane, elements, whatever. And so when I see this, I'm like, this makes it to where Asta is always going to be at a disadvantage against his opponents. Even though he's able to block with his sword, we got to remember something, okay? His sword is pretty big, but it can't block all the way around his body. So that means if someone circles in around him and hits him, he can't block that. So that's kind of bad. That's really bad. Now, let's talk about something that was very interesting, caught my eye, and I enjoyed the episode for it, but at the same time, it was a sense to where it was rather unnecessary. There was narration in this episode of Black Clover. Now, this is the first time I've heard narration, obviously, in a shonen, let alone anime. But, as I've said many times with other anime I have reviewed or even talked about in separate videos, I love narration. I do, because it allows us to get, world building, insight to the character and why they do these certain things. It allows you to kind of appreciate the situation. Now, sometimes narration can get a little bit excessive and possibly even detach you away from what is going on, and you might not like the show as much anymore thanks to the narrator kind of holding your hand to what is going on. In this case, I feel like this is the one only negative with this episode. Like, the big negative that stands out to me. When the narrator pops up, it's not that I have a problem with the narrator. Don't get me wrong. I like narrators. I really like narrators when they come in and explain things. I mean, look at Hunter x Hunter, okay? But the narrator that came into this episode, it was pointless in a way, because I think all of us can kind of understand what was going to go on there. When Asta's muscles were tensing up and all that, and when he went to block, it was kind of obvious. I don't think you need a high school education or even a middle school education if you watched enough anime to know what Asta's body did. It just moved on its own. I mean, if you've seen some shonen, you most likely have seen this before, and so I don't believe a narrator was necessarily useful in that moment. I just don't think so. I felt like it was there to explain things, which is cool, but in terms of the context of what it was trying to do, I'm just like, you have to be brain dead. You legit have to be brain dead for you to need a narrator for that moment to understand what Asta was doing. So that's my personal little problem with the episode, and that was one of the only big negatives I really saw with it, besides cliches, which, like I said, that's subjective and biased and all that, so I'm not even going to focus on that. So I think just the narrator, I like it. I like the narrator. I would like more of the narrator. I just hope the narrator doesn't explain things that are just straight up pointless, like what that scene was in this episode. Anyways, though, let's talk about something about the music-wise. I have neglected to mention how much I actually like the soundtrack for this series. Regardless of how I feel about the anime, or how the future episodes will be, or whatever, I gotta say I like the soundtrack. When I hear a good soundtrack, I hear a good soundtrack. And I actually like the soundtrack of this series. Even if I eventually come to terms with hating this series, I do like the soundtrack. And I will admit it's pretty good. I actually have grown quite fond of the opening song, not even gonna lie. I actually like the opening song, and I do like the ending song. Just music overall is really nice, which a shonen should have good music. Especially if it's a battle shonen, it should have good music. So, if there's one thing I can give this series, I will give it credit for that. Anyways, I guess, overall, that's about it. I mean, it's a good episode. Had its problems, but it was a lot better. It was solid. It was definitely a solid episode that I enjoyed, and I want more, actually. I do. I can't wait for the next episode. So, let me know your thoughts. How do you feel about what's going on in this series? How do you feel about the introduction of the Black Bulls and how each individual character is? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below, and tell me your thoughts on how you feel about the series thus far. So, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you like my content, obviously, please subscribe. It helps me out a lot. So, I love you guys. Please be safe. Chibi out.